So I've entitled tonight's verbal presentation by myself, Eat and Heat. How would you survive? So that's eat in terms of eating, and heat, keeping warm. And I want to kick off by just getting us to think about types of emergencies. So rather than this being about survival, I like to think of it as emergency preparation. And the things that came to mind for me, and it's not an exhaustive list, so if you can think of any that I don't mention, feel free to put it in the chat box. But so in terms of emergencies that we maybe need to think about and plan for, there's financial emergencies, things such as job loss, income reduction, and even on the cards at the moment, inflation, hyperinflation, things are going to become less affordable. Another type of emergency is sickness, ill health, accident or injury. Evacuations, in the sense of, if there was a chemical spill anywhere near you live, if you were near a kind of a factory or a chemical plant and something like that happens, on rare occasions it does, and people have to evacuate at very short notice for safety reasons. And then there's the obvious, like inclement weather, floods, snow, hurricanes, wildfires. And we've all seen a range of these things across our TV screens this year. And I think what made it quite unusual is that some of them were in unexpected places, or even more severe than we've been used to seeing. And my mind is thrown to Germany. I think it was earlier this year when we saw those horrendous floods in Germany where houses were washed away. I guess we're used to seeing things in what they term the third world, but we're not often used to seeing things like that in first world. And inclement weather, there's the obvious disruptions, threat to life, loss of home, property, things like that. But it can actually, it doesn't have to be that severe to disrupt supplies getting through, supply chain getting through to supermarkets and stores. And it actually can arrest people in the sense that you can't actually get out your home. It's not, what I mean, if the snow's up to your knees and you can't dig your car out and all that kind of stuff. So, inclement weather can cause a problem in various guises. And then there's your things like power cuts, loss of utilities, pandemics we can add to the list now, as we're currently witnessing one, and all the restrictions and challenges that's brought and is probably going to accelerate as we go along, for those that are watching the news and have eyes to see and ears to hear. And then there's things like civil unrest, anarchy in the streets, curfews, and then to add to the list, cyber attack, loss of the internet, things like that. So these are all types of emergencies, really, that could happen at any time. And some are more frequent than others. Some we've not really witnessed, such as a cyber attack or civil unrest and anarchy in the streets. And in Britain, we don't have too bad at inclement weather, but that's not to be complacent and say these things could never happen. I think 20 months ago, we'd have all said the things that we've seen unfold could have never happened, and they have. So I don't know if anybody else thinks that I've missed anything, or, that's certainly maybe not an exhaustive list, but as I was thinking this morning, preparing for the show, those were the things that came to my mind. So it's just to set a context, really, and say, there are lots of emergencies that we maybe need to be aware of. So anybody want to add anything at this stage?
Yeah, I'll just say that when I was preparing the flyer, I was thinking the word emergency was not coming to mind. But as you've reeled off all of those, they could happen to anyone at any time. I know somebody in central London who was flooded from her house in terrible rains, and that happened in, I think it was June of the summer. It's only now that she's being rehoused. So,
Wow.
these things can happen, and it's likely that they will happen as we experience this time of change. So, sorry, Louise, over to
No,
you.
that's a really good point. Don't be sorry. I want people to interject. So what I'd like to say in ending that section is that all of the above can be temporary and short term, which is the best case scenario if we're honest. However, they could be more prolonged, and it depends on the situation and all the metrics involved. So, as the friend you've just mentioned, it's been several months for her. Some of these things can happen for a day. If it's a power cut, it can be just for a matter of hours, but it can cause inconvenience. And so, they can be short-term experiences, or they can be long-term and unknown. So in terms of emergency preparedness, there are lots of topics to consider under that heading. So again, I did a bit of a brainstorm. Thought shower, I think, is the politically correct term these days, about what topics should we consider under emergency preparedness. And there's the obvious: food, water, heat, energy source, shelter. So food, heat and shelter, really. Or shall we say food, warmth and shelter. But then, there's finances to consider in an emergency situation. There's security, sorry, knocked my headphone off. Security, sanitation, cleanliness and sanitation. There are issues around that. First aid, medical supplies and knowledge, very important in an emergency situation. Travel, modes of travel, if you have to leave where you are. Communication methods, if electronics and stuff go down. And, something that people may not think about, but I do, mental stimulation and activity. How do you, if the electrics have gone down, the utilities, there's no TV and all that kind of jazz, how do you occupy your mind when you don't have access to digital means, when you don't have an electrical current coming through, and you don't have a device because you might be out of charge, or your PlayStations and all that kind of jazz for young ones. So people don't often think about or prepare for mental stimulation and activity, but it's very important in an emergency situation when the normal things that you would rely on are not necessarily available. And also, I think another topic to consider is, devising plans and strategies for the household. In an emergency, do you have a bit of a plan of what to do if X happens, what to do if Y happens? Is evacuation, and having to leave your place of abode if necessary, if it becomes untenable to remain there. So, again, it's maybe not an exhaustive list, but those are the kinds of things that I thought about when I thought about topics under emergency preparedness.
Can I say something, sister? So you mentioned if you have to leave your place of abode and evacuate, are you trying to say that basically what would happen in a situation like that where you'd have to leave all of a sudden?
Although I have to say, I was a bit nervous because I got a DM from him. I'm going to mash you up.
I thought somebody was speaking. It was somebody who's not on mute. Okay. I mean, anything could happen, couldn't it? It's like I mentioned in the opening, there could be a chemical explosion from a plant or factory near where you live. There could be civil unrest where, you got vigilante groups going around causing mayhem, and it may not be, just think about some of the scenarios you've seen on TV, in fiction, in films and stuff like that. There are, in fact, I'm sure I heard something on the news in the last fortnight where something had happened somewhere, and just for safety, they'd evacuated the immediate area. So again, it might not be permanent. I can think back to what happened last year. I think Texas had some freak weather, really severe freak weather, and people actually were leaving their places of abode to go to a central place. I think it was some kind of stadium or some kind of public building that they were using as a warming centre, where people could go there for a few hours a day just to get warm. That was in Texas last year in 2020, and I think I might come on to talk a little bit about that later, because I think it might be pertinent to something I'm going to mention. But just to say, I don't think it's possible in the time allocated to go through all those topics this evening. So what I've done is, as I've alluded to in the title, I've called it Eat or Heat. And I want to focus on food, warmth and shelter for this evening, if that's okay with everyone. So that's what I want to drill down into. And I want to, before I get into it, I want to start with a disclaimer and say, actually, I'm not an expert on emergency preparedness, and I'm not a professional prepper. However, I've always been a natural contingency planner. I'm that person who'll always have a £10 note hidden in a book on the bookshelf for an emergency if I run out of money. I have a pair of scissors in my handbag. I also have a plaster in my purse, and I've always got a blanket and a torch in the boot of my car. You know, I just naturally do things like that. So I think it's in my nature just to think about contingencies. I've always been a little bit that way. But I'd say, in addition, really, in the mid-90s, when I was introduced to the teachings of the Most Honourable Elijah Muhammad, and learnt that he had began teaching his followers as far back as the 1930s, that they should always have certain things in their homes and be prepared for emergency situations. And I really took some of that on board, and I think it just took me to another level, from being a contingency planner, having those few things in a handbag and in my car, to thinking, well, you probably need to have a little bit more than that, you know, as time goes on. So for those of you that were on the call earlier on in the year when I touched a little bit on the topic and was asked to come back, which is what I'm doing this evening, you'll recall that I shared an experience of having a 9-hour power cut on Christmas Day 2019, which started just after 6 o'clock tea time until 3 a.m. The next morning. So it was 9 hours, and it just really showed me I wasn't as organised and prepared, even for something as short term as that, as I thought I was. So it was a bit of a wake-up call. You know, I had candles and matches, so I had ornamental candles on the mantelpiece. I always have boxes of matches, so I had light. I had a torch with batteries in that were working, because I often go out at night into the garage and use that torch to go and look what I need out there. I'm lucky I've got dual fuel. I've got a gas fire in my sitting room. So although I had no central heating or radiators, I was able to put a gas fire on and heat one room. My cooker's dual fuel. So I have an electric oven, which obviously couldn't use, but I could boil a pan of water on the gas hob and make a hot drink and things like that. And I did have a small transistor radio with batteries in, so I could put a little bit of background noise, but I actually fancied a bit of music. So I've got a portable CD player, and I thought, oh, I'll put a CD on, sit with candles, you know, pass a bit of time, because it was still quite early, you know, it was just after 6 o'clock. And I got it down off the cupboard, and I went into the drawer where I knew I had a packet of batteries that size, of quite big batteries. And I opened the packet, put the batteries in and pressed play, and nothing happened. Anyway, to cut long story short, eventually I worked out that the batteries had corroded on closer inspection. They were all rusty and they corroded. And when I looked at the, you know, kind of the expiry date on the packet of batteries, they'd expired about 3 years ago. Do you know what I mean? So that's why they weren't working. I actually ended up going to bed early. I was kind of a bit of a loss, no TV, no company, didn't fancy reading by candlelight. So I ended up going to bed and just going to bed early, to be honest. But it was a bit of a wake-up call. And I do feel fortunate it only lasted 9 hours, and the food in my freezer remained frozen. My freezer was jam-packed, as is everybody's at festive time of year. I did, after 2 hours, and it was still offering round both brothers, but both of their freezers were full, because obviously everybody fills the freezer. that experience just really focused me on how I need to be better prepared for even small inconveniences, and what would have happened, if that had been prolonged. I keep knocking. I'm not used to wearing a headset, so yeah, and what if all the utilities had gone off? So I just want to say I'm on a journey. I'm not an expert, and I certainly don't have all I would need in an emergency or to survive something major for a substantial period. But I'm probably a little bit more prepared than some people. And what I really want to do this evening is just to put it on people's radars, because it might be something that you've never really thought about. I think all of us on this call are the type of people that can see the writing on the wall and see that there may be some difficult situations coming down the line, whether that's national or global events that are unfolding daily. But it's about just being honest with yourself tonight, really, and just asking yourself that question, that rhetorical question: how prepared are you at home for even a small emergency situation? And I'd really like you to ponder that. I thought I was pretty prepared, and actually I wasn't as prepared as I thought I was, just through a 9-hour power cut, which is child's play really compared to some of the emergency situations that we could be facing in the future. So just ponder that, and I'm now going to get into the real subject area. And just to start, I'd like to start with a quote, which goes, "First do what is necessary before that which is nice." And I think this has to set the context going forward. First do what is necessary before that which is nice. It's becoming more and more urgent that we do get prepared for whatever may be coming down the line. And I think it's much better to be prepared and not need to be than not be prepared and wish that we had been. So, I suggest that we take that quote as our mantra and predominant thought each and every day as we wake up from now on and plan our day. Just start with that thought. First do what is necessary before that which is nice. And if we start our day with that mantra, it will focus us, and it will help us, to prioritize what's really important, what's necessary, and what's just nice to do. So the reason I say that is because your individual or household financial circumstances will dictate how much you can achieve each week. So the important thing is not to feel overwhelmed necessarily, and just to start. I don't know who on here could confidently say that they've made a start and they do have some emergency equipment and supplies at home as it relates to food, warmth and shelter. But what you can afford to spend from this day on, you have to make that decision as a household. But I think the important message is just to make a start, so from the next time you go shopping, make that start and make it a regular activity. And if you're in a household where finances are very challenged and tight, be disciplined and even learn to be creative. So what do I mean by that? If you celebrate the festive season that's literally on the doorstep, don't go mad. Have a sensible budget and stick to it. And don't incur further debt under any circumstance in the name of Christmas or even Kwanzaa or New Year celebrations, because going back to the mantra, do what is necessary before that which is nice. It's not necessary to get into debt for a festive celebration. So when I talked about being disciplined and creative, what do I mean by being creative? Well, if you're comfortable in incurring some debt, make sure it's on purchasing items for a survival kit or for an emergency situation and not for festivities. If you're quite happy to run up a credit card to buy Christmas presents or to go out eating meals and buy nice clothes for the festive season, ditch that this year and spend that money, put that on go to a shop and buy some essential items if you're happy with incurring some debt. And be smart and savvy. We're all coming up you know, we're coming up to the end of year sales when there'll be heavy discounts. Dare I even say next week, you know, there'll be Black Friday, and instead of buying a big screen TV or, you know, something like that, why don't you get to the outdoor shops and see what you can bag a bargain with in terms of emergency equipment? And don't forget, there's a plethora of charity shops and second-hand markets and car boot sales where you could possibly pick up items that you need, that you could use in an emergency situation. All you need to do is check that they're in good working order if they're second-hand and you're picking them up. So, you know, don't let budget and finance be an excuse not to make a start. There are creative ways where you can achieve some of this. Or consider asking friends and relatives that you know always give you a gift at festive times of years. Just suggest, you know, oh, you know, I'd like a, you know, depending how much they usually spend and stuff, you know, make a hint, or just be direct and say, oh, I'd like a really good quality sleeping bag. I've always wanted one. I fancy doing a bit of camping, and, you know, rather than get me something I don't really want or need, you know, just drop the hint. Or do you know what? I fancy a camping stove. I fancy, you know, doing a bit of cooking outside, and Ray, whatever it is, I fancy a festival tent. Or even say, do you know what? I'd like a gift voucher for Millets or Mountain Warehouse or whatever outdoor shop. You know, be creative and be direct, and say that's what you'd like or that's what you want. And, you know, if you are more organized and you've got things already and you've already started your journey, could you even consider giving that kind of gift to one of your friends or relatives? Because in an emergency situation, you know, you don't want everybody knocking at your door asking for help from you. Why not start buying those kind of things for your relatives and friends and discreetly put this topic on their agenda? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about being creative and savvy. It's each one teach one in the final analysis. And you know, those people that are your friends and family in an emergency situation could actually end up being a real burden, you know, because you might have planned for your household and you've got everybody else knocking at your door with woe be to me. And I know that might seem tight and raw, but your supplies won't last very long if you're helping everybody and the dog. And it's that simple. So, you know, think about ways how you can get it on other people's radar. Or instead of buying, you know, gifts that nobody really needs or wants or are nice to have, why not buy them gifts that are useful and that start their emergency kit off? You know, and lastly, under this segment, it's maybe about turning off the TV and start doing research on YouTube or any other platform or avenue that will increase your learning and skill set about prepping or survival in emergency situations. You know, remembering that list of topics that I started with earlier. Often on my lunch break, when I'm working at home at the moment, when I go downstairs to have a break, put the kettle on, have something to eat, I'll often just scan YouTube, and, you know, sometimes I'll listen to stuff about finances and creating wealth and all that jazz, depending what mood I'm in. But at least twice a week, I'll go to a prepping channel. You know, I've got certain people who I follow and stuff like that. And nearly every time I'll pick up a little bit of something that's new. Do you know what I mean? And on that point, you know, if there's something that you hear or see on a YouTube channel or a tutorial, you know, have a special notebook and note certain things down, because in a real life emergency, if you've got no access to electrics, if your phone's dead, you cannot just go tap into YouTube and think, oh, what that thing again about what to do if somebody's got fever, that potion, and, you know, was it 2 apple skins and what have you, you know what I mean? If you come across things like that, write it down. So if that emergency happens, you think, oh, I've got that in my notebook, because you may not be able to go onto the internet or use your phone to find that information. So I think we need to get into that. Or, you know, if it's something you can print off hard copy, because I know, you know, we're all digital these days, but digital won't cut it if internet goes down or we've got no electricity. You know, once the battery's gone on your phone or your laptop, that's it, unless you've got a power pack that's fully charged. So if we go to food, where to start, what to buy?
Can I just say one thing as well? I think that you are flinging it down. Thank you so much. That, what you've just said about going on YouTube, but having a notebook to make note of everything is like the best thing. I'm constantly writing and making notes, but it's also good to have telephone numbers as well listed, so that, you know, if we need to get hold of people, then we've got their numbers. Because gone are the days when we're using our brains and remembering, you know, we used to know everyone's numbers.
I still have a paper book, address book, that I've had over 20 years. So all my real close circle and family and friends, if I lost my, because I always think if you lose your phone, half your contacts have gone. Do you know what I mean? So I've got anybody who's really important in my life, you know, they're in a book from 20 years ago, and sometimes I've updated that information if they've changed the number or their address, but I've still got a paper copy. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I told you I'm a contingency planner. I never threw my paper address book away.
Wow.
Still got it. Yeah, I don't just rely on a phone. Okay. I've never lost a phone, but that doesn't mean to say, you know, I've water damaged one once, you know, dropped it down the toilet and lost everything on it. But do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's good. You know, you can't beat a pen and paper and hard copy sometimes. And it's just the important things, you know, the really important things that would be useful in, you know, where somebody's giving you a procedure or a recipe, or this is the process, you do this, you boil that, you know, you do this with that certain injury and what have you. You know, little nuggets of wisdom like that, you might want to jot them down in a book, because you may not be able to go to YouTube or the internet when the emergency happens.
And be sharing them as well.
Yeah.
I know Brother Nat has just said that his mother still uses the Filofax. Nat,
wow.
Nat, I hope that you had something written down when you smashed your phone the other day. Because it's so true. Even if we have them recorded in the cloud, you know, the internet will go down at some point. Electricity will go down at some point. It's inevitable. It has to, in order to raise more emotion and fear and chaos. So yeah, back to you, Sister Louise.
Okay, so that's fine.
This.
No, it's fine. I love the interaction. It makes me feel like I'm not talking to myself. So, you know, please feel free to you know, to interject. So food. Because if we're looking at food, warmth and shelter for this evening, where to start, what to buy. So lots of preppers, I've listened to lots of preppers, you know, like I say, I'm often on YouTube and what have you. And a lot of them advise buying things that your family generally eats, you know, buy the things that your family are used to, that, you know, they like and they eat, and have a good stock of these items and rotate their use in date order, you know, Ray. Now, I think maybe that's an okay strategy if you're trying to guard against, say, something like inflation, you know, price rises. So you buy lots of the foods that you generally eat as a family, because you can see, you know, in the future, there are going to be price hikes, and that's not a bad strategy if that's what you're trying to do. But I wouldn't focus or start there unless you already have a reasonable supply of what you would deem emergency food stock. I wouldn't just be buying more of the things that your family generally eats. Similarly, I wouldn't start on filling the freezer or the fridge. I wouldn't start there. I'm not saying it's not important to have a well-stocked fridge and freezer. I'm saying if you haven't started at all, I would not start with just buying more of the foods that you generally are stocking your fridge and freezer. Because if the power goes off, unless you've got a backup generator, those foods will be the first to spoil unless you can eat them very quickly. And if you've got a packed freezer, there's only so much food you can eat. And unless you've got backup power, that food will spoil first. So I wouldn't start there. I'm not saying don't have a full freezer, but make sure you've got the other things I'm going to come on to first would be my advice. I would start with bottled water. and tinned foods. And I say water in bold and in capital letters, and start buying them now, immediately. If you've got nothing in your house that in terms of bottled water or tinned foods, you need to start now, because you can only survive 3 to 4 days without water or liquid that's, you know, got a water content, before things start getting serious. I'm not sure you'd drop dead within 3 or 4 days, but you won't, you know, you'd lose compos mentis, you'd be disorientated, and, you know, you might start to have severe organ failures and damage and stuff like that. So it's very, very critical that you don't go 3 or 4 days without water or liquid. So that has to be first and foremost. You can last for weeks and months just on water. You know, if we're comfortable, I'm not saying you won't get hungry, but it's, you know, you could survive quite a long time on water. So that's first and foremost. But then secondly, my advice would be to focus on tinned foods. And the reason I say that, and I'd say maybe the cases of 12 small bottled waters rather than the big waters, because I think they're easy to store, because they're stackable on top of each other, those packs of 12 small bottles, and they're easier for rationing and portioning, you know, depending on what you think the duration of the emergency might be. You might just think, well, everybody gets one of those bottles a day. You know, if you can't see an end in sight, you have to proceed with caution, and it's easier to ration and say, that's your bottle for today, that's your bottle. I mean, there is an optimal amount of water a person should drink every day under normal circumstances. And I forget off the top of my head, I've got it written somewhere, but let's say, for example, it's a gallon, just for argument's sake. You may not be able to achieve that in an emergency situation where you've got a limited supply of water. So you may have to ration the water, but it's very dangerous to go more than 3 or 4 days without any water or liquid. And if you've got the small bottles, even though that's not the optimal amount of liquid for functioning, you know, it's going to sustain life. And I think it's easier to ration than dealing with those big bottles and pouring it into something and using more than you should. That's just my opinion. And they're easier for stacking on top of each other.
Okay, can I just quickly jump in and ask a question?
Yeah.
Huawei has said that we should also look out for sell by dates and use by dates. I was going to ask a question, I don't know if it's silly, but does water go off? Can water?
No,
it doesn't go off. Perfect.
No, it doesn't go off, but they do have to put use before date on it. And when I say it doesn't get off, you know, as long as you've not opened it,
yeah,
and it's, you know, it's probably not been, I would say in an emergency situation, any water that's been bottled and not opened is going to be better than no water. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. You know, if it's there's issues around it being in plastic, and you know, is it BPB? I forget what that acronym is, you know, in the plastics and stuff like that. But in an emergency situation, do not be worrying about, well, it says use by date from 18 months ago, you know, drink it. Okay. You know, drink it. And yeah.
If it's fizzy or still, does that matter? Is that too much?
I would stick to still water, to be honest. Yeah. Plain still water. Yeah. Okay. And really, essentially, if water's kept in, you know, airtight, you know, and not opened, and that, it should always be okay to drink. Yeah. So focus on that and focus on tin food. Somebody said to be aware of best before and use by dates. The difference is best before is a quality thing. You can eat something best before that's 3 years out of date. It's not a safety issue, it's a quality issue. It might not be as potent or in the best quality, but it's not harmful to health. If it's got a use by date, you use it by that day, or you know, and it's usually on more perishable foods such as, you know, dairy. You know, you'll see it on coleslaw, cold meats, and those kind of things, margarine and butter and things. And even then, you've always got a few days or a week. You know, I've used coleslaw a week out a day. When it starts frothing, that's when I throw it away. Do you know what I mean? But if it, you don't get what I mean. And sometimes you can get another 4 or 5 days. And actually, you know, another strategy is about not wasting food, you know, as well. So I would start with water and tinned foods. And for me, there's and just on water, you should not use that bottled water for anything except drinking. It's not for washing your face. It's not for rinsing your underwear in. Do you understand? Bottled water is for drinking. It's not for cooking. It's for drinking, because that sustains life first and foremost. You cannot survive very long without water. It literally is liquid gold in an emergency situation. And within tin foods, I think there's a hierarchy and you should prioritize. And you should prioritize, in my opinion, those that you can eat straight from the tin as a meal. And what do I mean? Like, I mean, if you had no source of fuel, energy to warm, cook food, that's how you determine what's a priority food to stock first. Could you open that tin if you had no gas or electric? You had no extra water to be adding to the cooked food. Could you open that tin of food in an emergency and just eat straight from it? And that's what you use as your, to assess. So things like baked beans, in an emergency situation, you could just open a tin of baked beans and eat them at room temperature. I'm not saying, it's ideal. I'm saying in a survival situation, you could open a tin of baked beans and eat them. Chunky soups, like what they call big soups, the soups that have got little chunks of potato and, some of them have got bits of lamb and chicken in. You could open that tin and stick a spoon in and you could just eat that if you have no source of heat or anything. Oily fish, tinned mackerel, tinned sardines, pilchards, tuna, salmon if you can afford it. Corned beef, even though it's processed, it's not necessarily what I term a healthy food, but we're talking about survival situations or emergencies. Corned beef and the vegetarian alternatives, like you can get vegetable curries or lentil curries, you can get the soy mince bolognese in tins and stuff like that. But please know, in an emergency situation, your principle of being a vegan or a vegetarian may just have to go out the window, and you just may have to make those compromises. A lot of us are vegan. I'm a vegetarian of 25 years. In an emergency situation, trust me, I will eat some corned beef and a tin of mackerel if my life depends on it. So, it's just to be mindful. Just because you are choosing to be vegetarian or vegan, don't pass up them things in the supermarket while they're available on the shelves. Pick them up, because corned beef, at the moment, I've been keeping an eye, corned beef and a lot of tinned fish, especially if you get the ones that are not flavoured in sauces and stuff, they tend to have at least a 4-year shelf life on them. I saw corned beef last week that had 2025. And even then, if it hasn't been opened and the tins are not damaged or rusting or stuff like that, the food is okay to eat, years after those dates. And in an emergency situation, you're not going to say, oh, it expired a year ago, I'm not going to have it. Do you know what I mean? You do not, it would be all right. It may not be as potent quality, but it would be all right. So tinned fish, tinned meats such as corned beef, they've got long shelf lives and they're a source of protein. And just remember, you may not be able to be a strict vegan or vegetarian in emergency situations.
So 45 spam, tins of spam. You're going to have to start picking them up. Okay.
Well, the next point in brackets, a lot of us won't eat pork, so go for corned beef. I don't want to say an emergency situation because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I would hope that I would never have to eat pork to survive. what I'm saying is pick up tin fish, pick up corned beef, if you eat that anyway, I'm not saying don't, but pick up everything else but that.
Can I just say something, sister? Can I just say something? I think what a lot of people need to do as well, sister, this is just a tip. Practice starting to eat one meal a day from now.
We're getting
yeah,
to
all right. I'm just saying that's to prepare you for when you do get in a situation like that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was coming to that. I was saying, I was just going to say what kind of food to get, and then I was going to talk about the number one thing you need to do in an emergency is reduce food consumption, and it would be good to start. Some people maybe can't go straight to one meal a day. What my advice would be, if you eat 3 meals now, try and slowly reduce it to 2. Do you know what I mean? And practice reducing your consumption wherever you are at. If you eat 3 meals a day and snack in between, the first thing to train yourself to do is to stop snacking in between meals. Once you've mastered that, try and knock off one of the meals, try and knock breakfast off and just have lunch and tea. I think it's really important that we learn, we start training ourselves to consume less food now while we've got a choice, so it's not such a shock to the system. Because what I was coming on to is part of the strategy is, if we get into an emergency situation, you cannot be eating 3 meals a day, because your stock won't last very long. It will literally be 1 meal a day, and it'll probably be under calorific. You know what I mean? It might be a tin of beans and a small tin of sardines between, if you're in a 2-person household, that might be it for the day. If you don't know how prolonged the situation is going to be, if it's only for 3 or 4 days, you can be a bit more generous. But if you're not sure, you have to start reducing consumption. And actually, part of the strategy, especially if you are tight on finances, to make a start, part of the strategy is start cutting down on food consumption now, because that automatically means that your weekly shop, you're going to have some excess that builds up if you start eating less now. So that is a really good point, and I was coming to that, but seeing as you've brought it up, we've dealt with it now. Start trying to reduce consumption from the level that you are now to something less, and just train yourself. And even if you can do an odd day where you just fast, maybe where you just have liquids, it would be a good time to practice doing it and getting used to it before it's forced upon us, really. But that's personal choice. And just on the I was talking about tinned corned beef, tinned fish, and that you may not have the choice or privilege of being a strict vegan or vegetarian in an emergency situation. What I'd advise you to be picking up now, if you do have strong principles around that kind of diet, is, pick up tins of jackfruit, because it's a good meat alternative. A lot of vegan chefs use it as an alternative, to make like a pulled pork dish. And also there's something called, what's it called, heart of palm or palm of heart, and I think that can be used as an alternative to fish. And then I think in Thai food items, there's something called banana blossom that you can buy in the tin, and a lot of vegan chefs use that as a fish alternative. They dip it in batter and it looks a bit like a fried, like what you buy battered fish from a fish and chip shop. So if you have got strict principles around remaining vegan and you are looking for alternatives, I'd say start buying tin jackfruit and banana blossom and palm of heart or heart of palm, whichever way around. I know in heart of palm or palm of heart, a lot of Caribbean vegan chefs use it as an alternative to saltfish with ackee. So that's where I first saw it and bought some to experiment with. And Brother Urban has put in the chat to be careful of corned beef, as it's got pork jelly surrounding it as a preservative. So again, what you could maybe do is make sure you cut the jelly or edges off, you know. And again, we are talking about in an emergency situation. And, you know, I myself don't eat corned beef as a rule anyway. I'm vegetarian, but I don't buy it for the household anyway, because it's heavily processed and it's got a lot of salt and preservatives in it. And so, you know, my philosophy is I'd rather buy fresh chicken for my son and stuff like that, you know, rather than buy preserved meats because of the salt content, preservatives. But again, in an emergency situation, you know, it adds some bulk. There is a little protein. It's quite flavoursome, you know, and things like that. So it's, you know, it's got a place maybe in an emergency situation.
I have bags of lentils and pulses. I've never eaten lentils and pulses, but I'm like, okay, if there's an emergency, then I've got lentils and pulses. And I don't know what to do with these lentils or pulses,
Okay.
but I've got them.
Might be able to help you there. I'm coming on to that actually, but in terms of recipes, I can help you there, because you know, I've been using them for a long time. But you know, I do use some of the Quorn stuff as a fake meat texture. You know, I'm not going to say I don't use some of those products, but I do use, you know, beans and pulses. So I can help you there. I'll invite you around, Laura, next time I cook some. Next hour, just some chickpea chana. You'll have to come round and break bread.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So
it's
okay. So once you feel maybe you've got, say, like, you know, and I'm talking if you've not made a start, if you haven't got anything, once you feel you've maybe got 2 weeks supply of those items, you know, and you have to decide what feels appropriate in terms of amounts of food as an emergency start stock for your household. I'm just throwing 2 weeks there as a suggestion. You know, if you think, you know, you won't feel happy till you had maybe a month's worth of those emergency items, then, you know, by all means continue. But at some point, when you feel ready, it's about moving on to stock other types of tinned food. So I have a hierarchy of priority, and I've just shared what I think are the most important types of food. And those are the foods that you can open and eat straight from a tin in a real dire situation. And I would start with those first, because nobody knows what the first emergency will be, when it will be, and how long it will last. So I would start with the worst case scenario. If all the utilities go off, you've got no source of heat or energy to cook, food's restricted, you can't get to the shops to replenish, and whatever. If you start with those foods, at least you can open that tin and stick a spoon in and have some calories for the day. And that's why I say I think it's more important to start with them. Then there's what I call the complementary tin foods that could be combined with some of the foods in that are number one in the hierarchy to make a more satisfying meal. So for example, tinned fruit, you know, and I would say in juice rather than in syrup if possible, because you don't want all that excess sugar on your teeth causing decay, and you know, you can't get access to a dentist and all that, yada yada yada. So but tinned fruit's important, and also tinned vegetables, you know, such as tinned carrots, tinned peas, sweet corn, because these things add towards your 5 a day, and they give you certain nutrients, and they add some balance to the tinned fish, or you know, the corned beef, or the tinned chicken curry, or what have you. They add some nutrients and some balance, and they make it a little bit more of a satisfying meal. And then you might go to something like tinned potatoes. Now again, I'm not a fan, but trust me, in an emergency they add some bulk and some carbohydrate, and again, you can just, you know, eat a couple of those with a few of the tinned carrots or sweet corn, with a little bit of the mackerel or whatever, and it makes it a little bit more of a meal, and a little bit of bulk. And then obviously there's tinned pulses, things like chickpeas, haricot beans, you know, things like that. Again, they not only add protein, but they add fiber, which is really important in the diet, you know, to keep your colon moving. And they're quite filling. And the thing about pulses is they're quite cheap staples. So again, if you're budget challenged, if finances are tight, you know, they're good things to start with. You know, sometimes you can get 3 tins of chickpeas on offer for £1. So, you know, at times like that, and I'm talking about the tinned ones. I haven't come on to dried stuff yet, because again, there's a hierarchy. And then something that you may not consider that I think is really important is dried spices for flavor. You know, so salt, you know, plenty of salt, pepper, dried mixed herbs in the jar or in packets, curry powder and garlic granules, and maybe some tomato ketchup as a minimum. You know, I think you should really get quite a good stock of dried spices for flavor, because a lot of the foods that we've mentioned in the tins can be quite bland. And if you've got a few spices, you can enhance, you know, those make-do meals, even though it's coming out of tins, you know. And if you're making, you know, I envisage doing a one pot where you might open a tin of potatoes, a tin of carrots, you might throw some mackerel in or some chunks of corned beef or chicken curry, and then you could add a bit of curry powder, a few garlic granules, a bit of salt and pepper, you know, stir it up, a bit of ketchup, give it a bit of colour, and you've got a nice little make-do one pot stew that 2 or 3 of you might have to have a small serving from, you know. So I think spices are really important. And again, just in this second complementary list, things like dehydrated soy chunks for a meat alternative. So I actually went through my cupboards earlier. I don't know if any of you ever seen these, the dehydrated chunks of soya. And again, it's like fake meat. The dehydrated, the hard. What all you do is soak that in hot water for 5 minutes to rehydrate it, and then it's chewy like a meat texture. You could throw it into that stew pot with those potatoes and corned beef or mackerel or what have you. This was £1.65. It's quite a big packet, as you can see. I'm halfway through it. Use it occasionally. That would do easily 6 portions. You know, feed 6 people a portion of, you know, so soy, textured protein in chunks. Get that, if you live in Huddersfield, get that from Javid's. Like I say, when I bought this last year, it was £1.65, and it lasts quite a long time, especially if you're in a single household like I have been until recently. Similarly, you can get dried mince. You know, if you like that meaty texture, obviously in an emergency situation, you're not going to get all the fresh meat. You'll have eaten your frozen stuff first in an emergency, but you know, this can last for it. You just dehydrate it in some hot water. As long as you can heat some hot water up, dehydrate it, fluffs up, and you can use it as you know, as a meat substitute. And just to mention that nuts, if you eat nuts are very satiating. You only need a handful of nuts, and you know, because they're quite calorie dense, you know, and they've got, you know, fats and oils in them. They're quite filling. So if you've ever eaten a small packet of salted peanuts, they're quite filling. You know, if you've ever used to have them with your drink, if you used to go to the pub and have a little, you know, those little packets, they are very filling. But again, if you're going to store nuts, I would say buy unsalted, because in you know, salt's just not good for health anyway. But actually, salted nuts will make you thirsty, and they'll make you want to drink more. You know, you might drink more than your ration of liquid and water for the day. And just on water, if you're finding it hard to get water, or if water ever you know, runs down in the supermarkets and it's not there, bottled water, as an alternative, buy long life milk and fruit juices, because it's still got a high water content. It's still liquid, you know. So water's liquid gold. It's, you know, but if you know, and start with that. But if you're ever going and things get really crazy like they did in the first lockdown and you can't get it, go for long life milk and go for fruit juices if they're available, because it's still a form of liquid and they've got a high water content. Do you know what I mean? Then they'll still hydrate you. So we've dealt with the eat straight from the tin. We've dealt a little bit with the kind of things you should buy after that maybe enhance the meal and provide a little bit of balance and protein and nutrients and flavour. And then I'd say once you've done those things and you've got your water and those 2 types of foods, only then I would suggest that you focus on your freezer and fridge, and your packet dried goods as part of your emergency stock. And the reason being, as I've mentioned, is if the power goes off, everything in the freezer would spoil probably faster than you could eat it all. If you've got a full freezer and the power goes off, you've probably got 24 hours, 36 hours maximum before that food starts to spoil, starts defrosting and stuff. And if you've got a packed freezer, you can't eat all that food in 36 hours, really. So that's why I say I would focus on the tin stuff first as my first emergency supply. And, depending on what the emergency is, if the utilities are not affected, then you're fine. You just keep eating your freezer stuff as normal, putting your oven on, you know what I mean? And you leave those emergency tin stuff for a dire emergency, when there's no utilities, when you can't get to the store, and you can't get out your house. That's when you go to that tin stuff. You leave that tin stuff. It's not for using every day in and amongst with your meals. Focus on your freezer, your fridge stuff, and more your fresh stuff and your packet stuff under normal circumstances. But just keep really stocked up with the foods that you generally eat, and leave your tin stuff and your water and stuff like that for when your stocks have run low and you can't replenish them, or and then there's no utilities. That's when you go to your tin food. So my advice would be to store them somewhere away from your normal everyday eat, that they are for an emergency. So when we're talking about dried goods and things like that, what you've got to think about is that you would need access to water. So water still needs to be running out the tap for you to be, because if you think about rice, pasta, noodles, they'll take from your water supply, and they'll also take energy to cook them. So I'm not saying don't have them, but have them, be using them now and using them as part of your like you said, Laura, you've got loads of dried pulses stored, which is good, but it's only good if you've got a source of energy to cook them and you've got water allocation, and they can take at least an hour and a half to 2 hours to cook, depending, if they're dried pulses. Brother Urban's on here. I often cook haricot bean soup. It's navy bean soup. It's a very nutrient bean. But even when I've soaked it overnight, I can still have to boil it to soften for 90 minutes to 2 hours. And in an emergency situation, if you're using a camping stove or, gas bottles and stuff like that, you cannot allocate that amount of energy. So that's why I say focus on tinned ones first, because they're already cooked. They're already cooked. And, in terms of dried things and grains, also consider couscous and bulgur wheat, because they take very little cooking. You can literally boil a pan of water or a kettle and put a portion of couscous in a bowl and pour that hot water on it, and it doesn't take any other energy to cook it. It will fluff up and then you can eat it, and same with bulgur wheat. So in a crisis, if you want grains and some carbohydrate stodge like that, you'd be better having bulgur wheat and couscous rather than rice or pasta, because you're burning your gas bottle for longer, and you probably need more water. So just a tip there. And as an alternative to bread, you could, because bread will spoil in a matter of days. And even if you've got it in the freezer, if the electric goes off, bread won't last very long. So as an alternative, you could consider picking up a few packets of cream crackers or various crackers or crisp breads, because you tend to get at least an 8 to 10 month shelf life on things like that. And again, it's a best before date that's on them. You could eat them a year out of date. It's just like they might not be as crisp, but in an emergency situation, you could eat a cracker, and it's a substitute for bread. Again, it's a processed food. I wouldn't say, under normal circumstances, be eating lots of things like that. But in an emergency, it provides some carbohydrate, a little bit of stodge and a bit of a filler, and it's got a much longer shelf life than, bread type products. And the other things to consider when I sat down thinking is things like jars of peanut butter. Again, quite satiating, high in protein, a spoon of that, you know, if your blood sugar feels a little bit low and stuff like that, you know, so peanut butter, got a really long shelf life as long as you've not opened the jar, you know, jam, you know, jams that you could spread on a cracker, honey as a sweetener, and you know, store sugar and stuff, because sugar is very useful for certain things, and especially, you know, like if you feel you've got low blood sugar and stuff, but you know, honey and jams and things like that, and coconut oil as a, you know, coconut oil you could use as a moisturizer on your skin. Can use it, you know, if you had an egg or something, you could use it as a base to fry certain things in, or add a little bit of flavor or bulk or calories. Or, you know, if you added a spoonful of that into your tinned food stew, you're adding calories, you know, because you're adding a little bit of fat and flavor. It brings your calorie content up. So they're all good things to have, and they all have really long shelf lives, you know, if the jars remained unopened. And they can add that little bit of variety into the diet, you know, because you might get sick of just having tin sardines every day and nothing a little bit sweet. If you've got peanut butter, could just have a little spoonful of that after a meal, and you know, it might just satiate you a little bit more. And again, when you're going out buying products, you know, think about the discounters, Home Bargains, B&M, Lidl, Aldi. It doesn't need to be top brands, you know, you don't have to be buying Del Monte tin fruit. You can buy supermarkets' own brands, they're all fine. You know, let your budget and your finances decide what's sensible for you to spend on things. And finally, a source of heat and energy for warming food in terms of just starting out and maybe having a limited budget or limited space for storing items and equipment. Just consider picking up something like this. I got this from Millets. It's a folding stove that was £5, and literally it folds flat, and you open it up, and as you can see, one of those small camping pans will sit on it, and then you get the camping stove, and then you get 24 solid fuel tablets. These were about £2.99, and this was about £5. And one of these tablets in this stove with a little mini pan, camping pan, one of these tablets will boil a cup of water, so it would make you a portion of hot drink in about 5 minutes. It burned for about 5 minutes, and it'd boil you enough water to make a hot drink of tea or herbal tea or something like that. So if you can't afford anything big and fancy to start off with, just have this. You know, just have this from an outdoor shop. You can get them on Amazon as well. But it means you've got a source. You can warm a tin of beans up. You know, in an emergency, you're not going to be able to boil food till it's boiling, piping hot, but it might just be more comfortable to warm a tin of beans up for 5 minutes, as long as one of these lasts, than to eat it cold if you're in the thick of winter or the temperatures are cold. It might be that it just helps to warm your body and keep your body temperature a little bit more if you can heat those sardines up or those tin potatoes. And this will give you 5 minutes burn time to at least, you know, warm a smoke. So they're worth considering. Won't break the bank, and it means you've got an emergency something that you can warm, a little bit of something, or you can boil enough water to make a cup of tea. If it's really cold, you know, having hot drinks really helps to warm you up. So I think, you know, if you've got a challenged budget, that's within most people's means, you know, and just start with that, and then every so often just go and buy more of the solid fuel tablets as well. And we've talked about tin foods, and just while it's in my memory, as I might forget to mention it, don't forget to have a few tin openers. Do not be relying on one tin opener in your drawer, because if that breaks, you are screwed. Do you understand? So make sure you've got 3 or 4 tin openers. Don't just have one. Even if it's one of them old Jagger ones, you know, that we used to have back in the day, that how many finger slip cuts did we have with it? You know, make sure you can open a tin and you haven't only got one device or tin opener, because they do break, they do rust. and what have you. And alternatively, in terms of fuel, you can get the chafing fuel canisters. And if you don't know what I mean by that, if you've ever been to weddings and funerals, they have them under the bain-maries. They have those big chrome dishes with water, and then they have the rice and the curry goat and the chicken and that sat above that water. And those chafing fuels are like, they look a bit like candles in a canister. You could use that as a source of heat to heat something up. So all you do is you'd sit your pan of food in something that had water underneath, and you'd have that chafing fluid underneath it, and you know, you could warm your food up slightly. So again, chafing fuel canisters are something, if you can't afford to be going out, you know, buying camping stoves and things like that, you know, you'll determine what your budget is and what you can afford, but just make sure you've got something. Start with that, and then as your finances grow, you've got a little bit more money, you know, you might go out and buy a proper camping stove and some propane gas or Coleman fuel, you know what I mean? But they're a little bit more expensive. They're probably 5 times more expensive than buying that little fold up, you know, what I showed you. So what I'm just trying to show is, even if you're financially challenged, I'm trying to show you alternatives and just pleading with people, get something that in an emergency is going to help you out. You know, and the more you can afford, obviously, you know, have a range of things and maybe start with something a little bit better. But I'm just trying to give you ideas. And in a bain-marie with the chafing fluid, you know, you could maybe capture rainwater or use water that's been used for something else. You don't necessarily, you know, because your food's not in that water, you're just using the water as a heat source. You know, you don't have to, it doesn't necessarily have to be drinking water that you use. So again, you know, they're one of those chafing canisters can burn, I think some of them burn for 2 hours, or you can get those that one can will burn for 4 hours. So if you're only using it for 5 or 10 minutes each time, you know, that's quite a prolonged use, because they come in cases of 6 or 8 or 12, I think. So again, you know, just something for you to consider. And again, it's based on your financial resource budget and space for storing things, really. Make sure not only tin openers, but you've got lots of boxes of matches. You need matches. And you may want to consider paper plates, cups and cutlery. They may be a bonus because you may not have washing up facilities, or you may not be able to spare the water for washing up your normal crockery. And in terms of storage, especially, you know, packaged food, you know, sugar, flour, pasta, rice, things like that, it's advisable, depending, well, I'd say unless you're storing them inside a cupboard somewhere, I think, you know, if you're storing them out in a garage, in a cellar or things like that, you need to be putting them in maybe plastic buckets, pails with the lids that shut down. You know, you don't want rodents or insects getting in there. And just a tip, you know, if you put bay leaves in the top of your, you know, if you put bay leaf, when I buy a packet of flour, because I have an overspill cupboard in my garage because my kitchen's so small, so nothing to do with emergency supplies, I just have a cupboard out there where, you know, I can store in it, because if I'm using a bag of flour, I like to know I've got one stored for when it's finished. So I have an overspill cupboard for stuff like that. But when I put my flour and extra bag of pasta and stuff out there, I usually put a bay leaf in the top, because bay leaves are repellent for, you know, certain bugs and insects. So, you know, if you've got a dried bay leaf, if you put that in the pail and, you know, with bagged flour and stuff like that, it just helps protect your food. Because the worst thing you want to happen is you think you've got an emergency stash, and an emergency happens, and when you go out down into the cellar, you know, somebody's gnawed at your packets of stuff and half eaten it, or, you know, there's rodent feces all over your food, because then it's not fit for human consumption. So, you know, try and think about where it is and how you can double protect it, really. And I've already mentioned, you know, the difference between use by and best before dates. And I was just coming to the point here that Brother 45 mentioned about starting to practice reducing consumption. And if you hit an emergency situation, that's not even an option. You must immediately reduce down consumption because you don't know when the end's in sight. And in terms of sustainable, you know, if you want to make your food supply a little bit more sustainable, if it's something that's more prolonged or you've no idea, at some point, no matter how much you've stored, depending on the duration of the emergency, you're going to run out. So things you also need to consider is what could you be growing out in pots, you know, in your garden or on a windowsill that can supplement. I wouldn't advise that you use that as a strategy to survive, because if you get inclement weather, it can kill whatever you grow in, you know, insects and pets can eat, and so you can't have that as your only survival method. You know, myself, Melissa and Cheryl, we did some planting this year, and some of my stuff germinated and grew and some of it didn't. So I think you can only use it as a supplementary, and I think it's good because it's some fresh produce and it's going to bring you certain vitamins and nutrients. But you know, don't, just because you might be a proficient grower and have a greenhouse and a polytunnel and think, oh, I don't need to have any tin stuff, and no, you do, because things can go wrong, you know, with growing stuff. But I think you should have it alongside as a complement. And then once you've tackled the things that I've mentioned, it's just really just buy normal groceries as and when for daily use, and just continually keep picking up stuff. It's like, you know, sometimes, you know, I have a budget every week for my grocery shop, and even if I didn't need something this week because I hadn't used it from last week, I will still pick it up. Whatever my budget is, I still spend it every week, because while it's on the shelves, just keep picking it up, and you know, just keep buying it while it's there. So that's it on the food bit, really. Has anybody got anything they want to say or ask? And again, I'm not an expert, but if there's something you want to ask or you've got a query, I'll do my best. But there's lots of other people on that have got knowledge and experience. Before we go into the next segment, the other two segments are not as long, you know, warmth and shelter. But I don't know if people have got anything they want to say, got any thoughts, you know, how is it feeling for people, you know, because it's not a nice topic, really, you know what I mean? And I'd like to think this is a safe space, you know, if people are feeling anxious, but it's got to be prepared and not need to be.
We were from St. Kitts to say something. Go on, brother.
Might be a sister.
You can't hear you.
It's a sister, it's Josephine.
Oh, so, is it a sister? I can't see something.
Yeah, Josephine, wow, I didn't realise you were. Oh my gosh, that's made my evening. Can't hear you, Joseph. Have you muted yourself? Oh wow, Josephine from St. Kitts. Can't hear you. Can you type it in the chat, Josephine? Can you type in the chat box, maybe?
Can you?
Oh, can you? Yeah, we just heard you.
Can you still hear me?
Only just. Shout.
Nice. Lovely to see everyone. Lovely to see you.
Wow, look at your skin glowing. St. Kitts sun, eh? Oh, wow.
Thank you for sharing such an important topic, actually. And I agree with everything you were saying, especially I plant, so I have food in my garden. But
I've Caribbean.
But I've started buying tin stuff as well.
Yeah.
So like you were saying, every time I go into the store and if I see beans, because beans are always out of stock a lot. So I'll buy my tins of beans and pack them in the cupboard, cream crackers, and pack them in the cupboard and store. One of the things that I find really interesting that you were saying was about the water, because I don't use water from the store. So now it's made me think I'm going to have to start buying that. And the smaller bottles, I boil my water, or we go to the standpipe and get that water. But in terms of like boiling and putting there, that's going to be something that's going to be different and a shift, really. So I'm going to have to start buying water that's actually sealed. And the other thing, Louise, for us is that we get weevils in our flour and sometimes in our pasta and things like that. And I like the idea of the bay leaves, and I hope
Put
that
the bay
works.
leaf in, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so now
I've never seen any. I've never seen any in my flowers since I've put bay leaves in.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what had happened over a 5-year period, for example.
Yeah.
But I've had flower because in last year's lockdown you couldn't get flower, and when I saw it, I picked up about 3 packs of plain flower and self-raising flower all in one swoop because we hadn't had any for ages. And I put the bay leaf in, and I've not even used all of that flower, and it's past its use by date. And I opened a packet this week, and it was perfectly fine. It was fine. Yeah. There was nothing in it. So
we found what helped us was to store them in barrels. Yeah. So we've started storing in barrels. So
those blue plastic ones.
Yeah, the blue plastic ones, and they was tightly sealed.
Yeah.
So that helped us a lot, really. But I will add the bay leaves to that as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad that's useful because it's worked for me, you know, it's worked for me, no weebles at all.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, it's lovely to see you, Josephine. Oh my God, that's made my
all
evening.
Of you as well. Yeah.
Oh, and I'm glad it's useful and it's getting you thinking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, yes, Olinka, would you like to unmute, Olinka?
Hey guys.
Okay. Hiya.
Just a quick thing to say about the pulses. If you the things I've come across with the pulses, if you use bicarbonate to soak it, that's
it cooks
good.
Quicker. Yeah, it cooks quicker, doesn't it? Yeah.
And then also as well, pressure cooker. If you get the one on the hob, it cooks the pulses a lot quicker, and it cooks it right down. It cooks it properly.
Yeah.
So that's my contribution. Well, well done, Louise. It was brilliant.
I was up at 6:30 this morning getting prepared. I thought, my God, I better prepare something. I've had a manic week, honestly. But honestly, if it's useful to people, it's worth it. All I want to do is be of service. So if it's useful to people, it's just worth it. Do you know what I mean? If it helps one of you think about something that you've not thought about, then for me, that's all I can ask for, really. And somebody, thank you, Melissa, it's put in about what about supplements such as chlorella powder, spirulina, and stuff like that. I agree. Again, I've missed that. It's somewhere on my sheet, but also to say that obviously in an emergency situation where food intake's reduced and calorific in that actually supplementing with a good quality multivitamin and you know some of the powders such as these, if you've got them, obviously it's going to help with your nutrient profile, you know, because there's certain amounts of micronutrients within those. So definitely invest in some good multivitamins. And when I say good, I don't mean £1.99 ones from the supermarket. I don't even mean £5 ones from Holland and Barrett, because stuff like that, you're just wasting your money. You need supplements and vitamins that are from naturally occurring from food sources. You don't want synthetic chemical man-made vitamins because your body just won't absorb them. They don't do what you think they do. So, you know, in the vitamin world, really, you get what you pay for. If you're picking them up in the supermarket in Holland and Barrett, unless you're buying, you know, I'll take back what I said about Holland and Barrett in the sense that if you're buying Viridian or is it Solgar? Yeah, Solgar. If you're buying those brands, those are quality from naturally occurring sources, you know, from food sources. But don't buy cheap multivitamins from the supermarket or from Boots the chemist, because you're just wasting your money. But you know, in an emergency situation, a multivitamin will give your body some of what it needs. So it should be part of that survival kit, really.
I think Sister Olinka's got her hand up as well now.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought I put my 2 cents back in again.
No, it's fine.
Seaweed, like sea moss and stuff like that, because they're highly nutritious, sorry. So, and they can keep for a very long time. So if you're in the same vein as the flour and whatever, if you buy them and put them down, so, because let's be honest, We know that the supplements will have a shelf life. You can still always fall back on the seaweed. So I'm talking dulse, sea moss, nori, anything of that description.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
But how would you be eating that? I know that when it comes to stuff like seaweed, you've got to wash it, so you're gonna have to make sure you've got water. But then, this is just me being, because I don't know, can you just sit and chew it? Like,
it's dried, I think. Cheryl's meaning the dried in packets, so you just eat it. You'd eat it like a snack, like you'd eat a packet of crisps.
Right. Oh, that sounds nice. Okay.
It depends. There's some. It depends on the variety that you buy. So like so at this moment in time, you can, if you buy dulse in a packet, then yes, you need to dehydrate that. If you boil up a bit of water, then I'd fling it in the water and let it hydrate, and then you can at this moment in time, I use it in a salad. Louise has had it, so she knows what I'm talking about. So there's different varieties that you can.
And there's nori sheets, isn't there, that they're using sushi, like in sushi bars. That's the green sheet that the rice or the raw fish and that is. So that nori sheet, you could just eat it as it is, and it's got certain nutrients, and it's got iodine and iodine.
They've got all sorts of the highly. They've got
nutritious,
very highly mineral base.
Yeah.
All of them. Obviously, they've got different composition, but all of them, I'd say, is very, very good. I think I would just say at this moment in time, start investigating and maybe experiment and have try them out and see which one that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and they are an acquired taste. I mean, I don't love nori, but again, in an emergency situation, if I knew it were giving my body some high nutrition, what I'd do in that situation. I'm not saying I hate nori, but I'm not chomping at bait. It's not something I buy every week. I think Cheryl likes stuff like that a lot more than I do. Do you know what I mean? But it's a means to an end sometimes. And anybody else on the food tip? Anybody? I thought you were going to say something then. 45 now.
Yeah, well, I was thinking more on the generator, and you might be coming on to that on the next topic. I don't know.
Oh, we'll have to wait and see. What? Yeah, food one.
Yeah, I don't want to jump in too quick.
Anybody want to take bets whether I'm going to talk about that or not?
Yeah, well, I just want to touch on the generator, but I think I'll let you expand on that.
Can I just jump in with one thing? I remember when I was at school, my home economics teacher said, if you've got a kettle that you can use, then you'll never go wrong. What I did, I think after your last presentation, was I went out and I brought a whole heap of stuff, like camping stuff and oils and stuff like that. And I did actually pick up some kettles that whistle. So that if anything ever happens, you can just put that on the fire and then it can heat up. And she had said, if from the time you've got a kettle, you can do noodles, you can do a pot noodle, you can do there's so many things that you can do, or as you've explained as well, use the water to heat other things as well. So just thought I'd say that. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, a kettle's good, and if you've, but again, I'd say what you can do in a kettle, you can do in a saucepan as well. So if money's tight, I would say buy 10 tins of food rather than spend money on a kettle if you've got a saucepan. Do you know what I mean? So it's what will double it up as something else. But by all means, it's useful to have a kettle, but to put it on an open fire, whether it's outside on twigs or what have you, it probably will have to be made of certain material, to withstand that. So, if it's going directly into an open fire and what have you, or, if anybody's got solid fuel in the house rather than gas or electric. But yeah, a whistling kettle certainly brings back memories. And if you can afford to have one, fine, but I wouldn't divert money from buying other things to buy a kettle. Do you know what I mean? So
in terms of what if, can I just ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In terms of the what Sister Laura said no, don't ask me a question. I will do. Yeah. In terms of eating, don't you think it might be better to? How long can the body last without eating for every day? Can you say like eat every 3-4 days or something like that?
Well,
That's to make the food last longer.
we know that people do 30-day and 40-day fasts, don't we? We know from biblical scripture, and we know there are fasting and water retreats now. Or somebody Cousins, I forget his first name, Gabriel Cousins. He runs water fast retreats, and people pay thousands of dollars to go, and detox, and so. You can go, we know you can go 30-40 days just on water, but you probably need a significant amount of water. I'm not talking, you know what I mean? If you're not having food, I'm not convinced you could go forever on a small bottle of water and nothing else. When you're doing a water fast, you might be taking water in every hour, and you might be taking significant amounts of it with certain nutrients and electrolytes and stuff in it. But we certainly know, I don't know if Brother Urban's got anything to say on that point, because we do know that spiritual and religious practices do advocate water fasts, but I don't know whether in between some of that people take coffee and juices just to enhance the nutrient intake. But I do think you can just do a water fast for 30 or 40 days and you're not going to die. But I would imagine you'd have to take a certain volume of water if you was doing a water fast. I don't know whether you've got anything to add on that, Urban.
Greetings, brothers and sisters.
Greetings.
Absolutely fantastic, Sister Louise. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love the fact that I've always known you're very meticulous in regards to what you do and your presentations and everything else. So that's
thank you. I felt like I was shortchanging people because I didn't have a PowerPoint. Just got some stuff on a sheet of paper.
You know what? It's in the mode that you're doing right now. Imagine everybody's so now used to a PowerPoint. You've just gone old school, sister. So it's what we've been used to. Everybody has a pack. Even Brother Derek can do PowerPoint. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not so sure he can, but yeah, we'll give him that one. So do you know about water? Do you know how long? Because how long could you survive just on water?
That is very one of the key points as well. I know that when we fast during Ramadan, you can sometimes go 10, 12, 14 hours without drinking any water. But that's just within that 24-hour day. And it's also a spiritual kind of fasting. It's not a fast where it's not even something where it's a case of a life necessity or anything else like that. So you have to be very careful. Your average person couldn't go 3 or 4 days without water because they would seriously hurt themselves. All I do know is that if you've got your head right, you're either a very conscious, very spiritual kind of person. Also, the fact that you try over a period of time to fast
and get used to it.
And get used to it. You can go without food for 10, 20, 30 days, but the water will sustain you, will keep you going as well. So that's one of the things that we have to, that's how important water is to the human body.
And that's what started with, isn't it? Water first, and then tin foods. Yeah,
that's it. And it's also based on the fact of the body. The body's 3/4 water. 75% of our body's water. So we've got to also maintain that, because if you can't stimulate the brain, the rest of the body is completely
down.
the head is the most important as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So,
No,
so to answer your question, 45, you can go a long time without food, but you must have adequate amounts of water, and going more than 14 or 15 out. You know, we know because of Ramadan that people do practice going 14 or 15 hours without water, but they do take water within a 24-hour period, and there'd be very serious consequences for the average person. But you know, you can have water-rich foods that have got water content. You know, there's certain foods that are high in water content, a lot of salad items, fruits and stuff. So, you know, you've got to think sometimes outside the box. If you haven't got loads and loads of water, but if you've got access to some fruit, or like I said, if you've got long life milk, or you've got fruit juices, you know, they have got a high water content, and they will hydrate you to a degree. So, I mean, you can do the experiment if you want, brother 45, and come back and tell us.
No, I knew the answer. I knew the answer. I was asking the question for the public that's listening